I wanted to share some of my thoughts on a documentary that I just saw on Netflix, which has been on for a little while. I just haven't seen it yet, but I guess it's been uh, available to watch for over a year now. And it's about Bruce Ivins, who's the man that was eventually accused by the FBI of sending the anthrax letters back in 2001, October of 2001. And I never really delved too much into this case. I just heard a little bit about it, peripherally speaking. But but I was intrigued and I was disturbed by the documentary, and I'll just try to unfold my thoughts here as to why I felt the way that I did. And I'm a newbie to this case, so if anybody else has looked at it more deeply and has any insight, I welcome that. But uh, what both intrigued and disturbed me was, well, I'll start with the disturbing aspects. Um, it seemed like there were it took the FBI 7 years to finally finger somebody and say, this is the guy we think did it. And the case never went to trial because he apparently committed suicide, which I know I mean, I've learned to take apparent suicides with a grain of salt. Um, you know, I wasn't quote unquote red pilled the way into October 2001 the way that I am now. So maybe if you looked at it a different way, some people would say that I wasn't as paranoid. I wasn't as much of a schizo nutter as in 2001 as I am in 2023. I'm sure that's what Colin Liddell and others would say. But um, anyway, there were actually over the course of this long investigation, there were two suspects. One was named Stephen Hatfill, who was who worked in some private capacity, but had some familiarity with anthrax, and they said that he had, I don't know too much about it, but they said that he had motivation to have carried out these attacks. The anthrax attacks were uh, something that happened right after 9/11, where just to refresh your memories if they need to be refreshed. Um, they were this series of letters that went out, and one was sent to, I think, one of the networks, NBC, I think it was, and one was sent to the office of Senator Tom Daschle, and they ended up sickening some postal workers and some other people who opened the envelopes, and I think five people were killed, and several more were hospitalized. Um, but who knows how many more were actually exposed to the anthrax, the dangerous anthrax bacteria, and what effect it might have had on them. That's a point that's brought out at some point in this documentary by one of the persons, one of the postal workers that they interviewed. But anyway, over the course of the investigation, there were two men who the FBI just decided, we've got our man, and we strongly suspect him, and so we're just going to apply pressure on him and surveil him, and not only that, but tell the media about it. So like I said, the first guy was Stephen Hatfill. That was his name, and he was, to my mind, he wound up something like what Richard Jewell was in the Centenary Park bombing in 1996 in Atlanta, which is where I lived at the time, by the way. I remember Richard Jewell was a security guard, and the FBI just came up with this idea that he must have done it, and they released his name, and they followed him around, and just were saying, yes, he's a person of interest, and blah blah blah. And his name was dragged through the mud, and eventually it came out that he was not guilty. Same thing happened to this first guy, Stephen Hatfill. They kept putting the pressure on him. The media was following him around, taking his picture, following him from place to place, and they thought they had the goods on him, and then it turned out, no, that was wrong. It was a dead end. He was not the guy. So the case went cold, and then a couple of years later, they come up with this other guy named Bruce Ivins. Bruce Ivins was working in some official capacity for the U.S. government, of scientists who handle anthrax and other sorts of, biological paraphernalia. My first thought is, like, what kind of stuff are they doing there, right? Why do they need to keep these dangerous substances around? Maybe they need them to study. If there's an attack, then they can use them to if there's an attack by some foreign entity, they could use those, what they've got to come up with certain conclusions about, what specific strain was used and what they did, maybe be able to come closer to catching them or whatever. But, biowarfare is a thing, so I don't like that the government has dangerous substances at their disposal. I don't like that at all. That was my first reaction to knowing about all this. But anyway, I'm not assuming nefarious intentions on the part of anybody who worked there. Just the fact that it exists at all is discomforting to me. These places, these facilities. So they eventually honed in on this guy Bruce Ivins, and they decided, no, he's the guy. This is like around 2006, 2007, and I guess they never formally charged him, but they kept they investigated him. And maybe one could say they ended up harassing him. They ended up, they searched through his house. Once again, it was another situation where they were following him around. The media knew that he was a person of interest, and it just seems to me like using the media to try to sweat somebody out. I understand the motivation for it if you really think that he did it, and you want to employ whatever tactics are possible to get some murderer, somebody you think was a remorseless killer to finally face justice, get him to crack or whatever. But it seems like there's a really fine line between that and just psychological torture. You know, psychological warfare, essentially. You know, we know they use these kinds of we know what they do. You know, they if you're in your religious compound, they blast you know, heavy metal songs outside of the compound, so you can't get to sleep, your family can't get to sleep. You know, they do all kinds of things that are just really, I think, of questionable ethics to try to that just seem like bullying tactics, essentially, with an ostensible proper goal in mind. You know, an ostensible righteous goal in mind, but nevertheless, it's troubling. It's not a not something that I think is you know, ought to be encouraged. And I think my estimation of all alphabet agencies has receded significantly over the past couple of decades. Of course, I was visited by a couple of those guys once, as you all know, or you might know. It's in one of my past videos if you're interested. But anyway, so what they found out about this guy is, you know, some things that seemed to be possibly suspicious, but never more than circumstantial, regarding, you know, that he had different P.O. boxes, and that he would spend a lot of time in the lab when you know, like, he spent a lot of time in the lab just when the attacks were happening, and the specific strain of anthrax. I don't know enough about all the scientific stuff to be able to know exactly what all that means, but some strain of this you know, this harmful bacteria was being. By the way, if you're wondering what the snoring sound is, this is where the snores are coming from. In case you were wondering what's making that noise, there you have it. But anyway, so they found these kinds of that he was spending time in the lab. He had different PO boxes. You know, he was acting in a way that seemed suspicious to some at around the time of when these letters were mailed. But it seemed like the bulk of the case that they tried to use against him was just to say that he was a weirdo, and specifically that he had you know, even though he was married, he had these relationships, or these not sexual relationships, but he had these seeming obsessions with other women whom he worked with, and that he had that once a girl belonging to a certain sorority had rejected him while he was back at college, so he broke into the sorority and stole their codes, and I don't know what the codes were exactly, but exposed their rituals like that. So we're getting into fraternity, sorority, you know, kind of shit there, like secret society, ritualistic stuff. which is weird. But so the idea was anyway that he had this kind of he was just that he was strange, and some people thought he was creepy. It seemed like most of the people that he worked with didn't think he was creepy. They thought maybe he was eccentric, but they found him likable, and they thought he was very competent at his job and so forth, and like but eventually they just the investigators developed this profile on Bruce Ivins, in which they said they were pretty much saying, look at how weird he is, look at how creepy he is. This was before anybody talked about incels, but basically they were trying to say he was an incel, even though he was married. He was married and he had kids, but because he was this nerdy, older man who was who supposedly had these supposedly creeped out a couple of women in his office, and had this whole thing going on with this obsession with this sorority that he felt had done him wrong because this girl had rejected him or whatever. They were using that against him, essentially, like saying this guy's a weirdo, he's a creep, he's a loser. He makes women uncomfortable. So I mean, and I'm thinking, okay, those are, if those things are true, then maybe he is, maybe he could be said to be a creep. I don't know. Or maybe this is all being taken out of context and purposely having the context purposely being reshuffled in order to poison the well, to make the public think certain things about him that are that say, well, of course, well, sure, he's just the kind of man you would think would do something like this because he makes women uncomfortable. Even though it was like a couple of women. It wasn't like a lot of women that he worked with seemed to think he was fine. And he was married. So anyway, like they hounded him until he committed suicide. And after he supposedly committed suicide. After his suicide, they posthumously said, he's the one, we think he did it. There's no smoking gun. Yes, it's all circumstantial, but we think he's the one. And the kind of arrogance that was being shown by the FBI agents who they interviewed was pretty galling. Like they had when they talked to him at one point, they had this interview with him. He was not under arrest. He had not been charged with anything. So he was just there. He was with his lawyer, wanting to seem cooperative, and the guy starts off with, what is the deal with you and women? That's the question that he asks him. What is the deal with you and women? Like, what does that have to do with? What does it have to do with him supposedly being the one who sent the anthrax letters? What? What would be how would that be motivated? Is it just he's creepy with women, so, or with in these couple of cases, we can file him under creep here, so who knows what else he might be capable of. You know, in some ways, this was like it seems like an early, a pre-incel um, uh, persecution of someone for being a quote-unquote incel or incel-esque type of man. You know, nerdy, not very attractive, you know, eccentric, maybe not always blessed with the proper social graces, um, and so forth and so on. What's that got to do with what? How does that make him, uh, you know, a suspect? And I mean, they did have circumstantial things regarding the strain that he had access to, and that a lot of that several others in that same lab had access to. But there was, I was shocked at the lack of a case that they had, and of course he that so they hounded him into suicide, and then they destroyed the evidence after that. Like, nothing suspicious about that at all, is there, FBI? That you destroy the evidence? I mean, why not? Why not keep it around, so that you can make sure your case is airtight? But nope, they say, case closed. We think he did it. He's dead anyway. So, God. The more I think of it, the more appalled I find myself becoming. And I didn't even know there were things to be appalled at with this case. It's all pretty new to me. So if you have Netflix, check it out. I can't remember the title right now, but you can find it. And tell me what you think. If you've already seen it, or if you know about the case, then I also welcome anyone's thoughts. Thanks for watching.